Welcome to the InnoGuide podcast, where we share the works of authors and mentors to guide innovation. I'm your host, Bob Boudelier. This podcast, my website, my newsletter, and my community are focused on helping you discover the secrets of innovation in the age of AI. Since I don't rely on paid ads, I want to thank our customers who bring me onto their programs as a technical product accelerator to work alongside their teams and help them develop products smarter and faster without adding risks, while bringing human-centered AI skills into their organizations. You can learn more at www.innoguide.net. In this episode number 95, we'll be sharing part 1 of Slack, Getting Past Burnout, Busywork, and the Myth of Total Efficiency by Tom DeMarco. This book challenges one of the most damaging myths in business, that a fully utilized organization is a high-performing organization. In medtech, that myth is everywhere. Keep everyone busy, cut the extra capacity, push the schedule, drive efficiency, reduce overhead. On paper, it looks responsible. The investors love it. But the book Slack argues that when every person in every team is loaded to 100% or near 100%, the organization doesn't get faster, it just gets brittle. And brittle organizations are dangerous in medtech. Because product development is not factory work, it's knowledge work. It requires judgment, communications, architecture, decision, regulatory awareness, risk management, and the ability to respond when reality changes the plan. And reality always changes the plan. One of the central ideas in this book is that busyness is not the same as business. A team can look fully occupied and still be slowing the entire program down. When engineers, quality leaders, system architects, and managers have no slack, there's no room to think, no room to respond, and no room to improve. And this is where timeline slip begins. This book also challenges the idea that people are interchangeable resources, fungible as he calls them. In medtech, this is especially important. You can't move a firmware lead, systems engineer, or quality expert across 5 projects and pretend there's no cost. Every task switch loses context. Every fragmented assignment creates drag. Spreadsheet may look great, but the team may be thrashing. Another key lesson is about pressure. People under time pressure don't think faster. They might work longer, but they may skip steps. They might defer hard questions, but they don't suddenly make better decisions. And in regulated product development, skipped thinking usually shows up later as integration issues, verification surprises, design history gaps, usability misses, or late-stage rework. We know what that costs. For me, the medtech leadership takeaway is simple. Slack is not laziness. It's the capacity to notice risk early, solve the right problems, retain good people, and adapt before the program is already in trouble. In a world where AI is accelerating everything, the instinct may be to push teams even harder, but the best leaders won't be the ones who create the most activity. They are the ones who will create the conditions for better judgment, better systems, and better execution. This is why Slack is still worth talking about. And that's what we'll explore in this episode of the InnoGuide podcast. This book is a fun read, and while it was published in 2001, virtually every element he shares across 33 brief chapters is just as true today as it was when he first published the book. And it may even have greater relevance in our modern age of AI, where we need Slack to be able to figure out how to leverage AI tools to assist us as our junior assistants. So without further ado, let's get started. Back in the 90s, corporate culture was defined by a dangerous belief that being constantly, exhaustingly busy was the only measure of an employee's worth. Tom heard this from a friend at Digital Equipment Corporation during their darkest days. He said, "There were madmen in the halls looking for someone to axe. Guess who they were targeting? The people who weren't absolutely swamped." That mentality still haunts our workplaces today. But here's the context. Western business is thriving in extraordinary prosperity. Yet, years earlier, we were paralyzed by fear. How could we compete against cheap third-world labor? How could we match Japan's brilliance or work ethic of Eastern Europeans, Taiwanese, and Koreans? In our panic, we did what seemed logical. We purged thousands of people, folks with homes and families. We right-sized our organizations ruthlessly. Somewhere in that process, we made a critical mistake. We didn't just cut fat. We cut the heart out of our organizations, middle management. We asked ourselves, what's the point of middle managers? And we ditched them, flattening our hierarchies. But here's what he came to understand. Middle management isn't bureaucratic waste. It's where reinvention happens. It's where ideas are examined, taken apart, analyzed, and reassembled into new organizational models that let us move forward. By aggressively cutting those layers, we optimize the present at the expense of the future. And this brings us to something critical: slack. Slack is time when you're not running at 100% capacity. It's the oxygen that allows innovation and change to breathe. Yet today, we treat slack like a disease to be eradicated. The question we have to ask ourselves is this: in our obsession with busyness, have we destroyed our capacity to change? That's the challenge we'll be exploring throughout this book. Busyness. Here he challenges an assumption about success, that bustling activity equals business achievement. Picture this: you're directing a film about a highly successful company. How would you show that success on the screen? The instinct is to film everyone working frantically, staying late, rushing between meetings, visibly stressed. But his consulting experience inside some of the world's most successful companies, Microsoft, Apple, HP, IBM, and DuPont, tell a different story. They weren't buzzing hives of frantic activity. They were surprisingly laid back, with energy that felt more like extended families on a shared journey. Success meant not just getting things done, but helping people learn, grow, and actually enjoy their work. And here's what gets interesting: extreme busyness actually damages organizational effectiveness. Consider a secretary. Let's call her Sylvia. Invaluable because she prepares documents, schedules appointments, and responds immediately when something urgent arises. Then a cost-cutting consultant arrives with a stopwatch and discovers she's busy only 43% of the time. He sees waste and recommends splitting her among multiple managers. Makes sense, right? The flaw is obvious in hindsight. A person scheduled at 100% capacity can't respond when something urgent comes in. They're too busy. Modern organizations are networks where work flows from person to person. Keep everyone constantly busy, you need backlogs, work stacking up in inboxes. But those stacks slow everything down. Each pause in somebody's inbox adds to total transit time, making the whole system slower. Bill Gates captured this perfectly. In the past, only the fittest would survive. Today, only the fastest will survive. So you need that slack to be able to react. You can make an organization more efficient by eliminating the slack and maximizing busyness. But that's not the same as making it better. True improvement often requires reintroducing slack, giving your organization room to breathe, reinvent, and adapt. The goal isn't just activity, it's meaningful progress toward what actually matters. The myth of the fungible resource. Here, he dives into one of the more persistent and damaging misconceptions in modern business, the idea that people are interchangeable resources. He starts with a simple question: what's the difference between a dollar and a person? Money is fungible. You can move it from one budget to another without losing anything. But people aren't dollars. Yet that's exactly how many efficiency experts treat them. When you're under pressure to show quick results, assuming people are fungible is incredibly tempting. It lets you shuffle them around and claim you've improved productivity without doing any real work. It's the ultimate shortcut. This assumption has given birth to matrix management. You know, that organizational structure where everyone reports to two bosses. Suddenly you can divide someone like Lamar across multiple projects, split him 43% here, 57% there. Theoretically, you've solved your problems. But here's what actually happens: task switching. Every time he switches from one project to another, he pays a penalty. First, there's the mechanical cost, putting away one set of things, finding another, but it goes deeper. If he's doing conceptual work, he's interrupted mid-thought. If he's writing or programming, he needs time to rebuild mental immersion. There's frustration, too, and if he's on a team, he can't really bind with either of the team members. The research at Atlantic Systems Guild studied 600 programmers over 3 years. They found that each task switch costs roughly 20 minutes of lost concentration. With employees switching tasks multiple times per day, that's an hour of productive time lost daily. Yet, companies everywhere fragment their workers across 5, 10, sometimes more assignments, all in the name of efficiency. I haven't seen 5 or 10. I've seen 3 or 4, which is ridiculous. 2 is the max. The assumption is that task switching penalty is essentially 0, but it never is. It's at least 15%. When you downsize and expect the remaining workers to do more fragmented work, you're not saving money. You're just hiding a massive penalty in plain sight. Your workers look busy, but they're thrashing, and that's the myth you need to stop believing. Tom visits a lot of companies during the year, and he said that a paradox he's observed in roughly a third to half of the organizations he visits, the companies that obsess over efficiency and speed actually end up slowing down, and he calls these organizations over-improved. Here's an example of this. In knowledge work, the mantra he hears in the halls is hurry up, hurry up, hurry up. And when he was a younger manager, he felt proud hearing those words, but now he recognizes it as the sound of an organization going fundamentally wrong. Here's why. In knowledge work, we tend to think of organizations as linked networks of people passing information and work products back and forth. When you're running lean and mean, when you've cut staffing to maximize everyone's time close to 100%, you eliminate natural buffers. So it sounds efficient, but here's the catch. Knowledge work is dynamic. Things change every day. So here's the story he tells. Imagine an employee named Harry. His buffer of waiting work starts emptying because someone upstream is producing less. He looks around, sees everyone else frantically busy, responding to that pervasive hurry up mantra. Harry realizes that appearing idle is dangerous, so his job security feels threatened. What does he do? He slows down. Not dramatically, just enough to keep a steady queue of work sitting on his desk. He's now fully occupied, appears to be productive, and isn't a bottleneck. By all conventional measures, he's the ideal employee, except he's deliberately working slower. He's doing other things in between. That's the cruel irony here. Organizations that obsess over busyness and constant acceleration can inadvertently create systems where people protect themselves by deliberately slowing down. The very mantra meant to speed things up ends up achieving the opposite. Here's another interesting story. He says, despite my Catholic school education, I've come to see the creation story quite differently than the nuns probably intended. I had nuns do this as well. Eve is the real hero. She's curious, courageous, and completely undaunted by authority. When told she couldn't eat from the tree of knowledge, she essentially said, no way. She understood something fundamental. Personal growth matters more than obedience to arbitrary rules. If you're a great manager, you have Eves working for you right now. They're the heart and soul of your organization. But how do you manage them? You can't pull rank. You can't assign pointless tasks and expect compliance. Tell an Eve to fill out a skills inventory census when she's focused on meaningful work, and that form ends up in the trash, along with that employee. But here's what's crucial. For knowledge workers, growth is as essential as their paycheck. This is entirely different from managing factory workers a generation ago. That's the mistake so many managers make. He learned this when managing a nonprofit with volunteers. You can't control volunteers through authority, they just quit. Instead, you have to guide them so subtly that your standards become their standards. Even in for-profit organizations, you can't really control people completely. They simply won't give up that much control, no matter how much you pay them. The real trap is hoarding information and decision-making authority. Healthy communications happens in the white space between lines on the org chart, not in the endless meetings with external stakeholders. So here's the paradox. To keep control, you have to give it up. Use your authority so sparingly that no one even notices you're using it. Like a gifted helmsman who steers with the lightest touch, you create space for your team to grow, make decisions, and yes, make mistakes. That's real management. What about business instead of busyness? When you build an organization with sensible amount of slack, both time slack and control slack, you're not just managing resources, you're investing in responsiveness. Your people aren't drowning in tasks, and you're not micromanaging every decision. Yeah, this costs something up front, but the payoff is substantial. The primary benefit is obvious, better responsiveness. There are 3 secondary benefits that are really essential for organizational agility. First, flexibility. Real change requires time and energy from people actually doing the work, not just specialized change teams. Everyone needs capacity to rethink how their part of the organization operates. Slack is how you invest in that vitality and maintain your grip on the future. Second, people retention. Knowledge workers aren't interchangeable. They bring domain expertise, the kind of specialized knowledge that lives inside your organization. When someone leaves, you lose a capital asset. Think about the math. If it takes 6 months for a replacement to reach full productivity, your human capital loss is 3 times that person's monthly salary plus overhead. Multiply that across your staff, factor in your turnover rate, and you'll see how much productive capacity gets burned just replacing people who've left. Here's the paradox, though. The harder you extract every ounce of capacity from workers, the more they leave, exposing you to massive human capital drain. Third, capacity to invest. Companies that can't innovate are usually just too busy. The principal resource innovation requires is slack. When I hear about companies investing outside their core business while neglecting their own potential, I call it bankruptcy of inventiveness. They haven't set aside resources for their people to think and create. And here's the fundamental truth. A penny saved is not always a penny earned. When you cut slack from R&D or innovation, you're moving profit from future years into this year. You're reducing your long-term value for short-term gain. That's business instead of busyness. The cost of pressure. Here, Tom challenges something we all do as managers, something our organizational culture tells us we should do: apply pressure. We're under constant pressure ourselves, so we tend to pass it down. We do this in obvious ways: aggressive scheduling, loading on extra work, praising extraordinary effort in front of others, and we do it in subtle ways too. Those dinky incentives like Advantage Miles or Employee of the Month plaques that signal to everyone, get cracking. Here's what troubled him about those incentives, though. They don't actually change behavior, yet they increase pressure anyway. How's that possible? Because most of what we do to increase pressure doesn't work the way we think it does. Now imagine you had a lever on your desk. Push it down, pressure goes up on everyone. Pull it back, pressure drops. Our organizational folklore says we should push that lever all the way down and leave it there. Maximum pressure equals maximum performance, right? Wrong. Here's why. His colleague Tom Lister made an astounding discovery. People under time pressure don't think faster. Think rate is fixed. Your knowledge workers can't accelerate their mental processing no matter how hard you push. So what can they do in pressure? Well, they can eliminate waste, defer non-critical tasks, and stay late. Sounds good, but here's the catch. In healthy organizations, people aren't wasting time anyway, and staying late, maybe it works once or twice, but it's not sustainable over months. A more realistic model shows that pressure can reduce delivery time by maybe 10 or 15%. Beyond that sweet spot, excessive pressure backfires. Workers get tired, they lose focus, and they start looking for jobs. The uncomfortable truth is that stressed out organizations that demand maximum pressure from its managers create demotivation, burnout, and the loss of your best people. The best managers use pressure rarely and never over extended periods. That's what real management is about. What about aggressive schedules? There's an idea that an aggressive schedule somehow benefits our work. It does not. Over the years, he's visited dozens of major development projects around the world and noticed a troubling pattern. The projects where people constantly talk about aggressive or highly aggressive schedules, they become fiascos. In fact, he's come to suspect that aggressive schedule is code understood by everyone involved for a schedule that's absurd with no realistic chance of being met. So, how do we managers get ourselves into this mess? Something happens to us during the commitment phase. We become like schoolyard kids posturing before a fight, promising performance levels we've never achieved and likely never will. Some companies even deliberately cultivate this overcommitment ethic. I once visited a training session, he says, where 100 project managers watched Formula One crash videos all evening, sending a crystal clear message, go for broke, literally. But here's what's dangerous about that. Many managers operate under an article of faith that impossible schedules cause no harm. The thinking is this: if you aim for 12 months and finish in 18, at least you started fast, right? Wrong. I'm not a believer in that logic, he says. Consider this real example. A client insisted on building a 2,000 square foot home in 1 week. To meet Friday's deadline, you'd need 50 skilled framers arriving on Tuesday. That means the foundation pours and cures on Monday, which won't happen. So Tuesday, 50 workers show up to nothing. Materials arrive prematurely. Plumbers and electricians have nothing to work on. your project costs more and takes longer than starting with a reasonable schedule. Here's the critical point. When schedules aren't met, blame typically falls on workers. That's backward. A bad schedule is simply one that's missed. Missed schedules indict the planners, not the workers. When substantial gaps exist between the plan and reality, when a 1-year project stretches to 2 years, the damage is enormous. Those who impose unrealistic schedules should be held accountable. That's how we change this dangerous culture. What about overtime? When he first started at Bell Laboratories back in 1963, his boss, Lee, laid down the ground rules with absolute clarity. I owed them 7.5 hours of work each day, no more, no less. Had to be in the office at this time, and dismissal was that time. And here's what fascinated him. Management didn't choose those numbers arbitrarily. They deliberately calculated them as the optimal amount of quality work they could extract without burning people out or making the job unattractive. Now he draws on an important distinction between two very different kinds of overtime. There's sprinting, those occasional extraordinary short bursts where you pull an all-nighter to finish something critical. Done right, sprinting actually builds organization culture and morale. A manager who uses it effectively becomes a hero, but the key word is occasional. The sprint must be truly exceptional and followed immediately by a return to normal hours. Extended overtime is something else. It's like asking people to sprint through a marathon. They exhaust themselves partway through and never recover. Knowledge workers are particularly good at hiding their exhaustion, but it shows up somewhere. Strain on their marriages, their families, their health. The organization never acknowledges this gasping phase. It's this insight, though, that changes thinking. Extended overtime is actually a productivity reduction technique. When researchers analyzed fields like circuit design and software development, they discovered something remarkable. Accounting for those longer workdays didn't reduce uncertainty in their forecasts, it increased it. The only possible conclusion, 12-hour days accomplish no more than 8-hour days. Overtime is essentially a wash. The hidden cost is staggering. Reduced quality from fatigue, burned out staff becoming organizational zombies, increased turnover, often the second or third largest cost at any organization. And when people work massive overtime, management abandons basic disciplines. One executive even admitted that if overtime were forbidden, he'd have no choice but to fix his meeting problem. Why don't you fix your meeting problem anyway? The math is simple. Extended overtime doesn't work, and that's the real issue. So when is a manager not a manager? When managers are overworked, something curious happens. They stop doing actual management. And the more they allow themselves to be consumed by extra hours, the less real management gets done. But before we explore that particular pathology, let's talk about something that enables this cycle. A hidden accounting trick that distorts how we measure productivity. Here's what happens in most organizations. Knowledge workers put in extra hours, lots of them. Person works 60 hours one week but fills out a timesheet reporting 40. Management nods knowingly, acknowledging the sacrifice, but the official record shows 40-hour work week. It's a small fiction we've agreed to maintain. Problem is what happens next. When we calculate productivity, we divide the work accomplished by reported hours, not actual hours. This creates a perverse incentive. Managers who extract the most overtime suddenly look like the most effective managers. Their numbers go up. But it's an apparent productivity improvement. The knowledge worker is actually less productive during those extra hours. They're tired, they're distracted. Imagine a worker produces 800 units during an 8-hour day, 100 units per hour. You convince them to stay 2 more hours. They manage 70 units in hour 9 and 30 in hour 10. Total output 900 units. Real productivity drops to 90 units per hour for the day. But reported productivity, 900 divided by 8 equals 112 units per hour. It looks better on paper. Without objective measurement tools, organizations assume productivity equals time present. This creates a pathological definition. Longer hours equal better performance. You might argue the company gains output without paying extra. Well, that's true in the short term, but extend this over time over months, and workers don't just become less efficient during extra hours. They limp through their regular workday too, exhausted and unmotivated. They accomplish less in 12 hours than they would in 8. That perverse productivity definition ensures this decline continues unnoticed until performance has already suffered significantly. This is one of Tom's favorite chapters, Power Sweeper. He said, it started with a simple observation. My wife Sally and I were having lunch at a cafe in Hilton Head when a maintenance worker approached with a leaf blower. The noise was deafening, conversation stopped, and Sally was unhappy. When I suggested it was just a labor-saving device, she gave me that look, you know the one, and said something brilliant. It's not a labor-saving device. It's a face-saving device. She was right. That leaf blower gave an invisible worker dignity and presence. His employer understood something crucial. People with zero status won't stay in their jobs. Give them a loud machine, and suddenly they matter. They're getting noticed. This insight led him down a rabbit hole. He started seeing face-saving devices everywhere, disguised as labor-saving technology. Consider the word processor. Before it existed, managers needed secretaries for typing. Today, those same managers do their own typing, and not just composition. They fiddle with margins, install software, troubleshoot conflicts, and perform genuinely clerical work. Word processor didn't eliminate that work, it simply shifted it upward to higher paid employees. This pattern repeats across our organizations. Desktop computers do the work once handled by clerks, typists, and researchers. The result? High-priced professionals spending a quarter of their time on overhead work. Is this an economy? Here's a real problem, though. We've eliminated low-level support positions because they're labeled overhead. Yet, when I studied project teams, the math was undeniable. 4 developers plus 1 clerical support person actually outperform 5 developers and cost less. Why? Because those 4 developers aren't wasting mental energy on administrative tasks. I once asked a university dean what her day looked like. She replied without hesitation, I'm a woman spending a third of her day being her own clerk, standing in front of a copier, filing, running errands. That image still troubles him. How many of your high-priced people are doing the same thing right now? That's the real question we need to ask ourselves. So what's the second law of bad management? It's a mistake he sees constantly, and one he's made himself more times than he cares to admit. First, he explains the first law, because you need that context. According to consultant Jerry Weinberg, the first law of bad management is simple. If something isn't working, do more of it. It's amusing and pathological at once, but doesn't really help good managers improve. So here's the second law, and it's far more insidious. Put yourself in as your own utility infielder. Here's what that looks like. Your organization has been cut to the bone. Position goes unfilled. Maybe it wasn't deemed important enough to justify keeping staffed. Your team is already overwhelmed, so you don't burden them further. Instead, you add the work to your own plate. You become both manager and worker. This can be catastrophic. When you assign yourself to that lower-level position, you unassign yourself from management, and management matters. Yes, the uncovered task matters too, but not nearly as much. He learned this the hard way, fresh from system design work, beautiful black and white work where designs either worked or they didn't. He was suddenly thrust into management's messy world of people, motivation, and nuance. When one of the designers quit, he jumped at the chance to cover his role. What a relief. I could return to work I understood perfectly. But he was running away. He was fleeing from the genuine challenge of management into the comfortable familiarity of technical work. And his organization suffered for it. Here's what you need to understand. Management is hard, not because there's too much work, because the skills are inherently difficult to master. Your mastery of those skills will affect your organization more profoundly than anything else you do. Talented managers stay attuned to what's actually working. They adjust, they refine, they don't retreat into familiar technical roles. So the next time you're tempted to cover that vacant position yourself, remember, your job is to manage. That's not a distraction from real work. That is the real work. And your organization depends on you doing it well. What about culture? Here Tom talks about something he says quietly poisons many organizations from the inside. It's what he calls a culture of fear. He starts with a story. In Umberto Eco's novel, The Name of the Rose, a medieval monastery is plagued by murders. A visiting scholar discovers that the head librarian has been killing monks to protect a dangerous manuscript, Aristotle's Treatise on Comedy. When confronted, the librarian explains his rationale. Laughter distracts common people from fear, and fear is essential to maintaining order. Law is imposed by fear, he says. This twisted notion has survived into the modern workplace. The culture of fear organization has telltale signs. It's unsafe to speak the truth. Being right about problems makes you the scapegoat. Goals are set impossibly high, guaranteeing failure. Power trumps common sense, and surviving managers tend to be angry and terrifying. You might think this seems extreme, but consider this. An airline magazine once ran an ad for a daily planner showing an absolutely livid manager publicly berating a subordinate. The copy never apologized for this brutality. It was presented as normal business life. That same image showed a father about to strike his child. We'd demand an explanation. But managerial abuse? That's just Tuesday. Angry managers are incompetent leaders who eventually crash under their own weight. But in the short term, they cluster together, creating pockets of organizational toxicity where growth is stunted, morale dies, and good people flee. The real damage shows up in what he calls the paradox of overstaffing. Desperate to meet impossible deadlines, managers load projects with far more people than needed, which actually slows the work and forces poor design decisions. That doesn't matter. What matters is appearing to try. And that's the culture of fear in action. If you're trapped in one of these, get out. Life is too short for this. What about litigation? Here's where he explores one of the most damaging consequences of the culture of fear. In his work as an expert witness and litigation consultant, he discovered that culture of fear organizations are dramatically overrepresented in courtrooms. While perhaps 1/10 of U.S. corporations are substantially fearful, more than half of those actually involved in litigation are true culture of fear organizations. Here he's blunt. Modern litigation is a losing game for everyone involved. Both parties typically spend legal fees that dwarf whatever settlement is finally imposed. Years of productive time evaporate, morale plummets, nobody wins, everybody loses. So why do companies litigate? He's identified two main reasons. First, litigation deflects blame. In healthy organizations, failure is acceptable. Microsoft even designed sink then swim into their culture. But in fearful organizations, failure must be punished. So instead of accepting responsibility internally, companies sue outsiders to pass the blame along. Second, litigation stems from fundamentally flawed contracts, ones with unrealistic prices and schedules that never should have been signed. When authority figures shout down concerns with, "Don't tell me it can't be done," reality eventually wins out, triggering expensive legal battles. The tragedy is that employees almost always knew something was wrong. They wrote honest emails, they raised concerns, but stress and fear silenced them. These people became devastating witnesses against their own cause. How do we avoid this disaster? Through fair exchange, arriving at agreements equally acceptable from either side. You should be willing to sign as either party, and critically, good contracts require slack. If a vendor commits without sufficient cushion for risks, you're inviting litigation. The fundamental truth is this: if you negotiate with the goal of screwing the other side, you're probably setting yourself up for court. But if you negotiate fairly, respecting both parties' interests, you're protecting yourself from years of costly, pointless legal warfare. What about process and process obsession? Here, we're exploring something that's become an epidemic in modern organizations, an obsession with standardizing how knowledge work gets done. Now, standards themselves can be wonderful things. Think about your telephone. Your new phone uses the same modular connector as your old one, same number pad layout, the same tones, it plugs into a standard wall socket. This interchangeability is essential to modern life. We can mix and match products from different manufacturers because standards govern the interface, not the manufacturing process. But here's where organizations go wrong. They confuse product standards with process standards. Fujifilm is required to meet standards for size and shape of a 35mm canister. But Kodak doesn't care how Fuji makes it, only what it looks like when it's done. That's the crucial distinction. Of course, we've just talked about film for cameras, which we don't use much anymore, and corded phones with an RJ11 jack, which we don't use much anymore. But the standards that he talks about here may be obsolete, but standards in general are not. We can buy a cell phone now from any manufacturer and it connects on any network. That's a valuable standardization. We can also plug an electric car in at any charging port anywhere in the United States, and they're compatible. Although you might need an adapter for some, but they are compatible otherwise. In factories, Frederick Winslow Taylor pioneered process standardization over a century ago, treating workers like interchangeable parts. Some manufacturers have since moved beyond this model. Volvo organized assembly into teams that follow a vehicle from start to finish, with workers mastering multiple skills. The Post cereal factory in Jonesboro lets each shift run things their own way. Both show that ownership of process creates engagement and loyalty. But knowledge work is fundamentally different. It requires invention, judgment, and rich networks of human relationships. A Bell Labs study found that star engineers weren't mechanically different from peers. They excelled at building connections. People returned their calls faster because they'd invested in relationships. When you standardize knowledge work, you focus on the mechanical bits, the easy stuff that's already partially automated. What remains is the hardest part, and the standard never addresses it. So why do companies do this? It's about control. Managers worry that without standards, they've lost authority. But true empowerment means transferring some of that control to those doing the work. Yes, it's risky. They might fail, but that risk, the capacity to disappoint you, is precisely what motivates them. Process obsession isn't ultimately about efficiency. It's about fear. And fear-driven systems always reduce mobility. The root cause isn't the process itself. It's the fear underneath it. So that wraps up part 1 of Slack by Tom DeMarco. And if there's one big idea from this first section, it's this. Busyness is not the same as business. A fully loaded organization may look efficient on paper, but it can become slow, brittle, reactive, and blind to the risks building up inside the system. In this first part, we covered why people are not fungible resources, why task switching destroys real productivity, and why hurry-up cultures often cause people and organizations to slow down. We looked at the cost of pressure, aggressive schedules, overtime, and the hidden waste created when highly paid technical people are forced to become their own clerks. We also covered the first and second laws of bad management, culture of fear, and how fear-based organizations often drift into litigation, process obsession, and quality theater. These are all things to consider when you hire your next team to work on your program. Ask how many admin people they have in their group. If they don't have any, you're paying highly skilled people to do admin work. And that gives you an insight into what that culture looks like and what you're going to be charged for. For medtech leaders, the message is especially important. If your team has no Slack, they may have no time to think, no time to see risk early, no time to make better architecture decisions, and no time to prevent rework before it becomes really expensive. And in regulated product development, that matters because speed without judgment is just motion. In part 2, we'll move into change and growth, including leadership, management by objectives, the timing of change, fear and safety, what middle management is really there for, and why organizations need room to adapt if they want to survive in the age of AI. I hope you'll join us then on that next episode of the InnoGuide podcast. Remember that our website is www.innoguide.net, where we have many resources for innovators, including those who want to leverage system-level thinking to get runaway timelines under control in their medical product development process, those who want to leverage AI in that process without adding risk, and those who want to build medical products that will support embedded machine learning now or in the future. Know that you'll be learning it from someone who's worked in medtech for 30 years and has led teams who developed and delivered 66 medical products. I also recently launched MedX, our medical executive discussion forum, where leaders gather every month to share insights about how to navigate medtech product development in the age of AI. Join using the MedX forum button on my LinkedIn page. I also want to thank Steve McIntyre for producing this, and I really want to thank you for joining us. Look forward to seeing you next time for part 2. That's a wrap.